And our second last speaker for the day is someone I think of as being a kind of elder of co-housing in Australia. Ian was part of one of the first co-housing groups in Australia and is going to share wisdom about things perhaps that things he'd wish he'd known when he started his journey. So I welcome Ian Higginbottom to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. All right. Are we good? Thank you. Well, thank you, Fiona. I remember when fairly early in Cascade CoHousing, I used to travel a lot for work, and I came home. I think I'd been away overseas for about 3 weeks, and I walked into the common house and common meal was on, and I walked in the door and a little girl just ran up and goes, "Hig, Hig," and leaps up into my arms and gives me this great big cuddle. And it wasn't my daughter. She was playing somewhere else. And then she ran back to her parents, and I'm going, this is one of those co-housing moments that just had me go that all the work of co-housing had been worthwhile. And they're those moments that touch the heart and might happen to us in our families or in things in other circumstances, but that co-housing made so much more likely. And I can remember some years before that, in fact when my daughter was about 3.5 maybe, her going out the front door and going, "I'm off to visit Gary," who lived about 300 metres up through the building site. We lived on a building site for a while. And she goes, "Bye, I'm off to visit Gary." And off she toddled and... Yeah, I'm so sorry. And she's off to visit Gary and walking up the hill 300 metres away. And no, she was determined. She was going to go and do that herself. And of course we watched her go. But it's still, and she did. She walked all the way up to the other house and to visit one of the other parents, or he wasn't a parent at the time. So there's been this series of these moments over the years that have just kept coming back and kept touching the heart and kept going. This is kind of why I'm in co-housing. This is why we did it. And I'm going to talk about, a little bit of reminiscence, I suppose, about what I've loved and maybe some of the things I haven't loved about Cascade CoHousing. Or no, about my experience of Cascade CoHousing, so I'm really clear on that. And common meals. People talk about co-housing and common meals and just how wonderful I think common meals have been over the years. So when we first had our common house up and running, I was running a small company. I was really busy. I had a young daughter. And you think, well, who's got time for cooking communal meals? But the practical bit of my brain is going, it takes me 3 hours or maybe 3.5 hours to cook a common meal once a month, but I get in return for that 12 other meals, which was way more time. So just on a purely practical ground, I could come home from work just in time to play with my daughter, do no prep, go up to the common meal, spend it with my family, spend it with friends, hang out, do a few minutes, 10 minutes of clean up, and that was it for the whole world of meal prep, eating, just really, really practical. No, this isn't the heart connection or the communion, just the mere practicality of common meals. And I just found with a young child and a busy life, that was sustaining. Of course, it's also one of the glues of the community, the fact that people were coming together. At the time, I think we were having 4 common meals a week available in our common house. We came up with a really flexible way of running these things so that we didn't have any money exchanged or any tokens or any, anything. We just went, well, we'll make the roster the length that it takes, and people just let you know, you cook in proportion to how many meals you eat. So if you come 3 times a week, you cook 3 times on the roster. If you come twice a week, you cook twice on the roster. If you bring a lot of guests, you kind of factor that in and put a little bit more. And the roster length changed, but you're always eating in proportion to the amount you cooked, so it was fair. But it also completely allowed for very big differences in people's household incomes. We had some people who were on pretty tight incomes, and we had some people who weren't. So some people, could put lobster on, well, maybe not literally, but could spend a lot of money, and other people would just spend the basics but still cook something delicious. So there was no constraints on budget, and we didn't have to even things out. So we were all cooking $5 meals when one person would happily spend double and the other person would be struggling to spend half. So it worked incredibly well. I love what we did with common meals, and are still doing. Cascade's still running 3 common meals a week and has been doing so for about 25 years now, something like that. They work. They really work. Sometimes we had them outside. I suspect this is a Christmas occasion, but common meals moved outside as well, depending on the time of year. Fiona mentioned rituals and celebrations and my name's go, Jeff, I've forgotten your name. Jim talked about celebrations and taking those opportunities to celebrate. And I think I really want to reinforce it, and we've done that at so many opportunities. So we have that midsummer/Christmas celebration every year. We had our let's call it Christmas celebration was always just co-housing, our residents and close friends and families. People who were ex-residents perhaps would come, but it was a close-knit community. Our midwinter celebration was always an extended invitation out to all our friends and families, and was a much bigger party. In recent years, we've been celebrating the solstices or having parties then, but they tend to be out at the fire pit. Someone was they wanted a fire pit on the that was you. Yes, that was it. And in recent years, I have a photo. Cascade ends up with, we have a fire pit finally, or fire pit in the bush on the lower part of our block. But then you think of all the other celebrations that have been there for weddings and birthdays. Every birthday of every age has been celebrated. Any excuse for a party reason. The other ones that come up in sort of parties become things like games nights were very popular, things that just get people together to do things. Dance parties, sometimes people would, there's a lot of other things that would happen in that space. One of our Christmas rituals is these little stars. We've got a star for everyone who's ever lived at Cascade CoHousing on our midsummer tree, on the Christmas tree, and that's really moving, because you can go back and go, oh, I remember Jill or Donnie or Danny. There's 3 there, but there's a lot of them now, of people. Anyone who's lived there more than a few weeks is on the tree, and that's there. And every now and again, you can see which ones are old and need to be redone. But it's fantastic, and it's those. Again, it's sort of that ritual, isn't it? The thing that binds both now and the past and the people, because it's about the people, which is another one from Jim. It's about the people and the process and the interaction. I want to talk a little bit about shared facilities, which is back to the hardware of it. This is the Cascade CoHousing Common House, or a view of it. And you can start to get a sense of the shared facilities from the children's trampoline in the corner, down on your left. I think, we're looking at the screen the same, your left. There's a workshop underneath. It comes back to parking. We were talking about parking with the ACT things. Theoretically, 2 of our council-approved car parks, I think, are in the workshop, but of course you can't actually park in the workshop because we use it as a workshop. And that's also got things like our bike storage and other areas. The decks, the eating in the sun, and you can just start to see into the space. The upstairs on the right has our guest room, and I guess what was originally called still probably is the TV room. And that goes back to those, again, they're sort of like rituals, back before streaming services let you binge everything in one sitting, serials on television would still come out weekly. So the weekly Doctor Who viewing or the weekly whatever it was that people were watching at the time would happen up in the TV room. So rather than just doing it at home with family, people would go, I'm watching such and such on Thursday night, who wants to come up? And half a dozen people would turn up. Or Friday night movies used to always start with a kids' movie, and people would buy fish and chips or takeaways and come up and sit and do that together. And this is where the physical infrastructure, the shared infrastructure of the development makes it easy to do things together. So while fundamentally I'm going to speak about co-housing as about conversations and processes and relationships, it's having the shared infrastructure that makes it easy to say, let's watch a movie. Who wants a movie tomorrow night? Or my parents are coming around, I've booked the guest room. Or let's get together on Friday night and have a party, or we've got this space for a party. There's a look on the inside. The main space is flexible, and this allows us to do a lot with this. This was set up for a celebration dinner. I'm not sure what it was for. Wonderful. It might have been our 30th or 25th anniversary. But that space, we can clear all the tables out of the space, and it becomes a dance hall or a place people can practice movement or run a yoga studio or whatever it is. But we've still got that sense of a lounge room and a dining room, and behind this photo where you can't quite see it is the kitchen, which we still built on a domestic feel, but with commercial size, so that it was really easy to cook for groups and make that sort of thing easy. And you can't quite see the fire pit, but it's just behind the photo. When we first built up there, this area was just covered in 3 metre high Spanish gorse. But as
How big is give us a sense of its size?
the whole size was, it's 8,000 square metres. Is that? And on which half of it we built housing, and the other half we freed from housing and returned back to mostly to native bush. And in recent years we've now been able to build our fire pit, and that's become a real centre of people doing things down there now, and it's just fantastic. The kids, of course, absolutely love it. But the shared facilities becomes the world of, it's about proximity. It's so easy to do things together when you've got a place to do it. We all know it's hard to drive 10 minutes across town to be with your friends. It's fine if you've got time to organise it, but not when it's, oh, I've got an opportunity, do you want to, can I get a babysitter at 10 minutes notice? That's really hard. But co-housing, I can honestly say my partner and I did not employ a babysitter in the entire life of our daughter, because there was just always a neighbour she could go and stay with, or someone who would pop over and be with her. It's not that we went out all that much anyway, but it was just wasn't needed, and it was wonderful. This is our chicken house. It's a very fancy chicken house. It got rebuilt just a few years ago, and in that sense it was a whole project in its own. The people who put that together just had a lot of fun, and yeah, it's an own sort of bonding experience out of just building and doing things together. although our chickens are an interesting piece because I've got them down under shared facilities, but some of the quirks of Cascade CoHousing were things like the land is common land on which it's on, but originally 30 years ago, literally when we first got the land, only a few people wanted to do chickens, so we really had this thing of, well, we'll provide the land for you, but everything on it is private. You know, it's like it became the chicken club. And as things rolled along, you end up with this weird sort of infrastructure that's not really private because it's shared by about half the group, but not really fully common either. And that's had its own interesting interesting negotiations when it then came to rebuilding and who paid for it, and so there's probably something to be said for learning to keep things simple. Like you have private and common, this halfway in between gets a bit tricky. Behind that you can start to see those common vegetable beds. There is a vegetable terrace on which people have got individual beds at the moment, so it's more an allotment system the way we've done most of our gardens. The crucible of co-housing. This is where we come to relationships. And this is where I've got to speak about my experience. I went into co-housing as somebody who was a lot better at speaking to computers than I was speaking to people. I was quite scared of people, I think, which is probably why I needed co-housing to get some community. And I actually think we had a little bit of that. It wasn't only me in that sort of space. I think I went in with my eyes open in that sense, that I knew I had a lot to learn and that co-housing really was going to put the heat on my people skills and require me to step up and get some. I think some other people probably thought, well, it's like in the book, we can have our private house and we've got the common facilities and we'll share the common facilities and that will be nice and I'll go home when I want to be private. I don't think they always realised, maybe as much as we might have, that there was a requirement to learn how to relate to other people fully. That was sort of a joke, but anyway, so for me, I've got this sense of this. It was a crucible, I'm still learning so much by being part of this group. When I was thinking about the slides, I read a paper, I can't remember who wrote it, they talked about a psychological studies that talk about humans wanting agency and communion. We both want to be part of the tribe, we want to be together, but we also want individual autonomy and agency. And we used to talk a lot in our early days about the paradox that co-housing was founded, or the founding members of this group were mostly single, mostly guys who were very independent sort of thinking, people who went about very practically getting things done, quite a lot of sort of people with an engineering background. So a lot of strength on the agency side, but missing the communion, the community side. And again, going back to that crucible of, great, we were really good at talking about designing the physical infrastructure and how we're going to build it and running the project, but we didn't pay so much attention to the community side, to the process side, to the decision making, to the people processes. And this has come up in a few different ways. Yes, this is actually more a gratuitous photograph of my house with the wisteria, but it was, but it put it in partly because that private agency doesn't just happen in your house. That world of how do we get on and make decisions together and do things happens in the common space. Yes, it's nice to be able to retreat to your home when you want privacy, but we still have to relate to people even when we're doing the common part. And I'm going to just touch on a couple of the things that were challenges for us. Is this a cat or a catastrophe? So the founding members of Cascade CoHousing, if I recall correctly, included at least one person, if not two, who were two cat owners, but we also, amongst our founding members, had one or two people who absolutely believed that cats and dogs should not be allowed in any suburban area whatsoever, caged or not. So our founding members started with these. Now, we didn't talk about pets and how we were going to deal with them right at the beginning. We put that off till we were a bit further down the line. But you can then imagine what happened when we came time to talk about cats or cats and dogs. I still think there's a few people around cohousing who are still got a little legacy resentment going on in that space. We ended up with a policy which is something very sensible, like we can have 2 free-roaming cats and a dog, and then nobody has to get permission for that. Anything beyond that you need to get permission for. And it kind of actually works, but the process of getting to it wasn't so easy.
Sorry, is that 2 cats and 1 dog per separate?
No, they're allowed to roam on the development. If you keep things caged or within your property, we don't put restrictions on that. But in terms of at that time, no one was thinking about cat cages and these sort of things. That was. So we actually had a dog that was allowed to roam. It was a very old dog. We now have a couple of dogs, but they are restricted to the owner's property, so it's not covered by that rule. As long as they're not annoying the neighbours, it's fine. But yes, so that was the idea. Was a bit about sharing, and because it came back to things. A lot of our environmental sort of backgrounds was not just the local impact on wildlife of cats, but what does it mean to be feeding cats, and what does it mean to be that? And there was a whole. But on the other hand, you've got the companionship and the love and the care and the things that come with people having it. So these were these deep values issues that need to be worked out in a group, and yes. This was the other one. to meet or not to meet in our common house. Again, our initial founding group had somebody who felt they could not eat in a space where meat was cooked, and we had others who felt that their social life was going to be deprived if they couldn't share some cooked bacon on May Day once a year or something like this with their friends. And so again, deep values pieces where it seems at the outset, even though you've kind of got these shared intentions of how does that work? Now, we have a resolution, but it's still an interesting one. So whatever you're doing, this world of how do you listen to each other from that deep heart, not from their head, but you're still working on a place where people may have quite deep differing value systems around things like food. So you can imagine with some of these things you end up with the odd person gets a bit burnt. Or at least I did. And our experience, or my experience of co-housing, not necessarily everybody's, and I really want to emphasise, this is really my take on this, is we brushed a lot under the carpet during all the construction and design phase until we got to the point where we actually had strata titled the development. Because up until that point, people, I don't know, it was like, it was like getting to strata title was a critical point of relaxing. We'd made it to a certain point. The thing wasn't going to fall apart financially or people pull out, and I think we left a lot, and again, as I say, not everyone would agree with this, but brushed under the carpet. What I found at this point, I'm going to give you an example, and I have permission to share this story. I remember having an argument with one of my neighbours, Russell. And in this argument, it was intense. And all I can think of is in my head is, this guy is just so selfish. You just cannot get anywhere with him when you're trying to resolve a group issue. And I heard myself, it just occurred to me suddenly that I'd had this complaint about this guy's selfishness for 5 years. And I said it in my head, but I'd been sharing it very unfairly, I suddenly saw, with other people, how selfish he was and talking behind his back, and I don't know what he said about me, but... and at this point, I'd been doing some personal development work, and I had a coach. And I talked to my coach, and in that conversation, for the first time, I was asked to look at me, because I absolutely had, it was you, it was Russell, he was the selfish one, it was nothing to do with me. And in that conversation, I was asked to consider, what could I be responsible for? And I'm going, I'm not, he's selfish, it's just how it is. And I spent quite a lot of time having to go, what could I be responsible for? It's not me. And then it struck me. And I remember it was like electricity ran down my spine. It was that kind of moment of realisation that I resented that he could put a stake in the ground and stand up for what he wanted, but I circled round and tried to do everything to make it work for the community, and I would give up my bit and not stand for what I wanted. Now, I don't think it worked that he did that all the time, but the point was I couldn't do what he was doing, or I realised I couldn't do that even when it was important for me, and I resented that he did it. And when I saw that, it kind of started to open up some new possibilities, because first of all, I realised that had cost our friendship and was costing our whole group dynamics of how we worked in meetings, because he and I just kept frustrating the hell out of each other. Every single group meeting had him and I bouncing off each other. So it cost the friendship, and I just wasn't taking any responsibility. And I can still remember walking around. It took me about an hour of walking around with the handheld phone to get the courage to call him up, because I wanted to apologise to him. And I did eventually call him up and apologise and go, look, this has been happening. I've been complaining behind your back. I've been taking no responsibility, and I want to clean it up, and here's how I see we can go forward. And in that call, the tension between us went from about 80% to 15%. A few weeks later, we had another thing that was going on, and we resolved it. A few weeks after that, about 2 months after that, he was living away from cohousing at the time. I went and stayed with his family and him on holidays, and at the end of that week of going, I've got this friendship back out of this conversation. And not only have I got my friendship back, it's changed the dynamics of Cascade CoHousing. And then the most horrible realisation came to me, which is if I could clean up my kind of resentments and my relationship with him, I could probably do it with everyone else in my life, which was both liberating at one level but really scary at the other, because I realised I had little things like that going on, maybe not as big as with that person, but with everyone else at cohousing that I hadn't had the skills and we hadn't had the processes to deal with. And it probably took me another 2 years to have all the conversations I needed to have to clean that up and deal with it. And there's just such a lesson for me there, is that we'd put so much energy into the infrastructure world, but we hadn't dealt with the group processes, the relationships, the interpersonal part, that had allowed that to happen in the first place. Not just me, but as a community. So that was really a real example of that crucible of co-housing for me, but I was getting coaching, I was getting some help to allow myself to deal with that sort of thing. And that was a turning point for me in my whole life, because that then allowed me to change my whole business. And then when I left the business I was running, I retrained in coaching, so my whole kind of career changed direction out of that point, from being not an engineer, but a software developer, to now being a leadership coach and an executive coach. And it's like, would not have happened without resolving that issue with that person. Which makes me think about what is co-housing. And this is a photo of a tropical cyclone. And and I'm not trying to take co-housing like a cyclone. I hadn't really quite got that part of the analogy. I was more thinking that a cyclone's not really a thing. It's a process. It's actually sort of water droplets in air. But because there's an energy driving them, they swirl and do this whole thing. And it only exists while the energy's there and the process is running. As soon as the process stops, it's not there anymore. And I think co-housing is the same. There's a process, there's the buildings and there's the things, but the process is what actually has it happen. And we've already touched on, consensus and democracy, and this was a piece we didn't do as well as we might have. Co-housing in Cascade was also founded by about, 2/3 of the first 10 members were probably veterans of the Franklin River campaign and had gone through all the non-violent action training and things of the day. So I think we just all assumed that everybody knew what consensus was. And we all knew, everyone just assumed everyone had been trained in it, and that particular group of people probably had been, and it worked. But we had nothing to train anyone else who joined. We had no induction process. We had no other point except assuming that. And we came up with this clever definition of consensus, which is basically that no one maintains an objection, because we had to write it into the body corporate rules within the Strata Title Act in a way that allowed us to have that there. And then years down the line, of course, we actually have no agreement on what does it actually mean and when is it valid to maintain an objection. and it's interesting what then happens, and if people maintain objection and other people complain that that's not consensus because that's not anyway, we don't have the structure in place. Now, mostly it works, but sometimes it doesn't, and we probably still have some work to do there. So it's all about conversations and relationships, and the young woman on the right is my daughter, and who grew up in co-housing and would still love to live in co-housing, and my heart goes out to co-housing for how it facilitated my relationship with her, because I spent so much time away that she and her mum were supported at co-housing. But not only are there the co-housing relationships of that, but there's the interpersonal relationships, because her mum, who's the other person there, and I split up when she was about 7, but neither of us wanted to leave co-housing. And Jane actually did go away for about 2 years, but we had to figure out how to build a new relationship as neighbours and bring up our daughter, because co-housing was that important to both of us. So the crucible, again, one or other of us could have left, but we took on what are we going to have to do to be able to build a new relationship that wasn't as partners, but was still as parents and now neighbours. Practicalities. I just want to touch a little bit here. There's been some talk this morning or today about the do-it-ourselves model. Well, we probably took do-it-ourselves to the extreme. The group completely built the common house. I think we employed a roofer and a plumber and an electrician. That was about it. Quite a number of us built our own houses. None of us had ever built anything before. My story is when I was 12, I built a cubby house once that got condemned by the local council and had to be pulled down, and building that was my experience. So I figured if I could build a cubby house that the council wanted me pulling down, I could probably build a house. and one of my other neighbours also had some building experience. He'd built a boat before, so he and I kind of ran the whole thing.
Did his boat sink?
No. Yeah, don't look too closely at this because the work health and safety aspects really are not there. You wouldn't do it today. But there's other pieces there. Do it ourselves. Someone used the word mess. Who said messy co-housing today? Yes, that was messy.
You say you need audacity.
Well, we probably had audacity, but we also took some risks. So we did it ourselves. We financed it. We actually managed to get a bank loan for doing all this mess until one day the men in dark glasses and suits from Melbourne came down and visited our bank manager and our site because we'd exceeded the loan threshold that he was responsible for, and suddenly Melbourne got involved. And that was interesting, so we had to kind of renegotiate our whole loan part way through. But I have just great thanks to the bank manager who lent us and got it started. We had high risk appetite. It's quite clear, and there's parts of that contradiction at the beginning of this group of individuals with high risk appetite who were going to drive things, but having then to let go and create community and communion and allow everyone else, and again, as Jim was saying about power structures and not ignoring those, just because someone had that high risk and could talk and do things didn't mean they got to run the place. There's a lot of letting go was involved. We did some things like, we made a choice that we wanted to build this within all the existing rules. So it's a strata title development. Our common house was discretionary in Hobart. Had we put it on its own title, which we didn't want, it would not have been discretionary. There wouldn't have been anything discretionary in our whole development. It was just a standard strata townhouse development. But we decided we wanted the common house on common property, so there was no possibility of it being sold off in the future, and not just owned by the body corporate, but actually on the common property. So we put it through, as a private community centre, which was discretionary in the Hobart scheme. The other thing we did that's really, I think, very practical is we lobbied everyone on the city council. So we had the most right-wing councillor on our side and we had the left-wing on our side. Community seems to go across the board. That it's not owned by the left and it's not owned by the right. It seems to be something that is, there's a universal sense of wanting community. We also, like Caroline was saying, we put everybody, all owners are on the body corporate. So it's an equal body corporate, but we've never succeeded in getting a way of giving formal rights to tenants, because we do have a number of houses that are privately rented. So our tenants are allowed to participate in all our decision-making meetings, but they don't have a formal right to do that. So, bylaws, we wrote the bylaws up front and changed those. We can't control who we sell to, but we did try to write into the bylaws things like attending common meals is part of our bylaws. Now, you can't ever enforce that, and there's a certain set of things, but it does mean when people buy and they look at the bylaws and people explain to them, what we really wanted is people were buying knew what they were getting into. So they don't come along naively thinking they're just buying a townhouse. The seller needs to invite them to common meals, anyone who's serious. And again, you can't enforce these things really, but goodwill and in practice, the 5 houses that have sold in 30 years, people have done those things. So our new people have always been very well suited to the development. We've got 14 titles, of which 2 are dual occupancy, technically, even I don't know if the council realises that, but one is actually, one is like that because it's got a door in between the 2 parts of the building that is actually kind of permanently closed, and the other is a house with what in Tasmania is called an ancillary flat. And the ancillary flat is the largest proportion of the total that you're allowed. that you can. So I think it's technically 36 square metres or something, the ancillary flat, which is then 1/3 the size of the total. But that worked, and then 2 people bought that as tenants in common, and then had to work out for themselves how they sell that and do things later. And that one worked out fine. So, in the end, I think co-housing's the journey of love. And because I've got all these people that I don't always get on with, but I love them, you know. And how to work with that after 30 years. And there's one guy at co-housing I still, feel for, but he doesn't want me to be involved anymore because I'm not living there now, which is breaking half the rules of co-housing because now I'm a non-resident owner. So he's got a legitimate complaint. And I've got a legitimate world of feeling a member of this community and having most other people feel like I'm a member of this community. So they're both legitimate, and all I can do is extend, my heart in those kind of places and stay in the conversation. And that's my grandson in the other piece. And it's his favourite place, coming and visiting co-housing. So architecturally, this is a set of kind of conjoined townhouses laid out with a pedestrian spine so that it encourages people to interact. But the buildings are not, they're essential, but they're not what make co-housing. Co-housing's not, they might be a co-house as a structure, but Cascade CoHousing is not constituted by its buildings. It's constituted, I think, by the members conversing and relating in the manner of co-housing. So my conclusion in the end is you don't live in co-housing, you live co-housing. I think we've got time for questions if the original... Are we still right on?
One question. What came first, the chicken or the egg?
Ian, can you say the questions for the streaming people?
What came first, the chicken or the egg? Can you say a little bit more about your question?
Oh, I don't know. You got the chicken coop.
Well, that was going to remain one of those paradoxical puzzles, isn't it?
Thank you very much, Ian. That was really terrific. I'm sorry to inject a sober note. Well, it's not entirely sober. I wondered if your co-housing communities had much discussion of the sort of cradle to grave concept. Have there been deaths there yet, or just becoming frailer, being able to stay? I think this is a really burning issue for intentional communities.
It is. There have been deaths. One very premature death that deeply impacted not just the family, of course, but the whole community. And in terms of cradle to grave, some of our houses are not well built for ageing. We've got a lot of 2-storey houses with stairs. All the houses except one have ramped access from that. So, so in terms of having an electric wheelchair or something, everybody except one house who could make a modification can do that. So for example, in my house, I will have to look at there would have to be modifications, but there are certainly a lot of residents who would anticipate ageing in place there, and we will probably end up having to make changes on our houses to allow it.
Can I just add, just a couple of connections, I suppose, that I make in my mind is, and people might know about this, there's something called the Groundswell Project, and that's one of the premises there is to die at home. It requires you to have about 12 or 13, I think, or 14 people on the team. And so
Right.
I think Groundswell is a really interesting project to look at if you're in community already or wanting to go into community, because, it seems to me that could, already exist. I mean, I know it's a tall order, but
Right. Yep.
yeah. Oh, and the other thing that I think about is you may know about Tender Funerals, which is a grassroots funeral business that started up in Port Kembla, and it's starting to spread. Is it in the ACT?
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Ian. My name's Ian Ross. I'm from Cascade CoHousing, which is the small 3-unit development, which isn't built yet, and we've spent 4 years getting to this stage. I guess most of mine is a comment. I wanted to thank you and all the other speakers because they've all just been fantastic at covering so many different aspects of co-housing, and I particularly like the way you'd managed to bring together the joy of living in co-housing that just highlights why we're thinking about this. I guess the main thing I wanted to say was that I'd really endorse most of the things that most of the speakers have said. Ours is a small group and it's in the ACT, and we're happy to talk to anybody about it, over drinks or over dinner. Joss and Trish here, the three of us make up half of the 3 couples that are going to be moving in, hopefully next year. And I just wanted to confirm that a lot of the things that were mentioned, I mean, having a vision statement at the beginning, we've certainly done that. Getting good legal advice, essential. Deciding on your ownership structure. We've got a company for some of the reasons that Carolyn was talking about earlier about control of exit. Conflict resolution, we've spent time getting that right, and decision making. Ours is based on sociocracy. In terms of the talk George gave about development, I mean, we have, knowing nothing about housing, have stumbled into being treated as a developer in the ACT. Admittedly, because we were a demonstration housing project of the ACT government, they were somewhat guiding us through the process, but that was a long and winding road with their help and without it. So having people involved in a project that actually knows the building industry or the development process is really key. The planning rules, Carolyn's talked about some of those, although I must say I don't think she's come across the problem we had with laundries, which I'm happy to talk to somebody about later. And building relationships, getting the finance right. We were so lucky that 2 out of the 3 couples have got the finance pretty much right there, depending on how much costs go up when we finally get the tender out. But working out what's possible in terms of financing is a tricky business. And some of the issues about value systems, for us it wasn't cats, it was dogs. But you've got to work through all of these issues, and some of them are going to come up later, and you've got to be prepared to work that through. So happy to talk over drinks or dinner. And probably the most important thing to say is I do have a spare dinner ticket available. If anybody has not bought a dinner ticket but has decided they'd like to stay on and talk, come and talk to me.
I'll just say one quick thing to that about laundries. So in Hobart, they required us to put laundries in, but most people did it to the minimum possible standard, like a cupboard laundry. In my case, I put all the plumbing in and then stripped it all out, and the room became my back room and office, but it passed all the tests, and there was nothing illegal about removing it. You just had to have it in there when it was built.
Well, Joss and Trish are applauding because that's exactly what they're doing. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to say that. And I will just quickly mention that the public servants that we've been working with in the demonstration housing project were very pleased when we discovered this glitch, which is that the ACT building code definition of a dwelling is different from the national building code of a dwelling, which on the face of it wouldn't be a problem. As Carolyn said, yeah, you can do without laundries under the ACT building code. Turns out under the national building code, you would be declared not as I've forgotten the correct term, a stage 1 building, class 1 or class 1A building. You would be in the same category as a boarding house, and therefore you need entirely different fire ratings. Therefore, the costs were going to go up.
Yeah.
So we've put laundries back in the units, well, temporarily.
Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I'm just interested to hear you expand a little bit more on the last point where you said we don't live in co-housing, we live co-housing, and maybe talk about how that might help us kind of break away from a dichotomy of co-housing and rest of housing, which to my mind is a false dichotomy that kind of speaks to some of the problems that we're kind of highlighting through today's kind of talks around the lack of community more generally. And from that, I'd be interested to also hear you kind of speak about how those principles in thinking about how we live co-housing, even when living in co-housing might not be always possible or immediately possible, could help us kind of bring in models of community engagement into the community more broadly.
Yeah, great. Okay, let me see if I can pick apart that. First, I tend, maybe even until I've listened today, I might be reviewing my stance on this, have been a bit of the co-housing purist who goes, co-housing is a very particular model of housing, but not in any sense to invalidate all the other models, which are equally important and just different. I remember a book that I've never read, but I've always wanted to, called Creating Community Anywhere. And I think it relates to this question, because co-housing is a way to create community, and proximity really helps. But that doesn't mean it's the only way, and as we've already seen, like micro co-housing, or I have an apartment in Canberra where there was quite a sense of community because we founded a book club that turned into a meals club that supported each other through COVID, and I had a sense of community in a 300 apartment complex, not with all 300 people, but with about 20 of them, and that really changed, my partner and I experience of living there. And then your other part of your question, I think I can address, is what I mean by living co-housing, and this really comes back, I think, to Jim's point that it's a process. You can have the buildings, and architecture, I read somewhere basically, architecture can get in the way and prevent community, almost, but it doesn't matter how good your architecture is, that doesn't mean you will have community. And so the architecture and the buildings of co-housing are designed to make it much more likely you'll have casual interaction and you'll do all the things that help community. But in the end, it's building the relationships and the processes that allow people to commune and deal with conflict and to deal with, and so, and that's the sense that it's and this is why I use the words conversing and relating. Again, they're processes, they're ongoing. If those processes stop, it's like an organism, the thing will die. And it's only alive while the processes are running. The buildings, to me, are like the cell walls or something, that if the processes stop, well, there's still a thing there, but it's not a living cell anymore. So that's what I mean, is that we live it in that it's alive while the processes are happening. And then it's like, well, what is it? What are the conversations and the process, what is the nature of relating and conversing that is it's an awkward speech, but is the manner of co-housing? And I haven't fully got my head around it, but it's come up in here. Someone else said to me earlier, well, we know we want community, but it's really hard to define. So we're trying to get at that. What are those conversations? What are those relatingness that keep co-housing alive?
Thank you. I think I think Ian will be around afterwards for a little bit of a chat if there are further questions as well. Thank you so much again, Ian. It's just